Why is it that a student in Germany can attend university for free while their friend in Toronto is paying almost $8,000 a year? Or a student in the US is taking on $100,000 in debt just to get a bachelor's degree? How did we end up with totally two different systems where one sees education as a public right and the other as a personal expense? Today, we are unpacking a global divide in higher education and asking why is university education free in many parts of Europe but not in Canada or the United States? Let's start with what it looks like on the surface. In Germany, public universities are tuition free and even for international students in most of the cases. In France, tuition is heavily subsidized and average less than $1,000 a year. And in Norway, education is free for all, even non European Union students in many cases. Meanwhile, in Canada, domestic undergrad tuition averages around $6,800 per year. And in the US, it can range from 10,000 to over 50,000 per annum, depending on the institution, of course, they choose. And that's just tuition that we're talking about. We're not even talking about books, housing, transit, or food. So, what gives? How can Europe afford this while North American countries continues to push the cost up to students and families? It all starts with how education is seen. In much of Europe, education, particularly higher education, is considered a public good. It's viewed as something that benefits everyone, not just the individual who earns a degree. And that mindset leads to policy. And governments invest more in universities because they believe it strengthens the society through skilled workers, social mobility, and economic resilience. In contrast, in Canada and especially the US, education is increasingly viewed as a private investment. You go to university to improve your career prospects, so you should shoulder the cost. And when the foundational belief is different, the system that follows looks very different too. Let's talk about money because free is not really free. Someone is paying for it. In the European Union, most governments fund higher education through general taxation. Countries like Sweden, Denmark, and Germany have higher income taxes than the US or Canada comparatively. But in return, they offer stronger public services such as healthcare and childcare and even transit for that matter. And it's like a social contract, and people pay more into the system and get more out of it as well. And in North America, we have lower taxes comparatively, especially for higher income earners and corporations. But we also have fewer universal benefits and more privatization. And that includes post secondary education as well. And in short, we have chosen low taxes and higher out of pocket costs. Let's zero in on the US for a moment. It wasn't always like this. Public universities used to be incredibly affordable, some even free, but starting in the 1980s, there was a shift. The narrative changed. College became seen as a personal responsibility, not as a collective priority. Funding was cut, tuition rose, and then came the student loan industry, which turned education into big business. And today, the US has over $1.7 trillion in student debt. And that's more than credit card debt. So while Europe doubled down on public investment, the US went in the opposite direction towards privatization, loans, and profit. And Canada followed somewhere in the middle. Of course, Canada doesn't have the same crisis level student debt as the US, but it's still expensive. Some provinces like Quebec have lower tuition fee comparatively to other provinces thanks to their stronger government support. But others like Ontario have frozen public funding and downloaded the cost to the students. And international students in particular pay 3 to 5 times more than domestic students and have essentially become a funding source for these universities or colleges. And there's also less predictability in Canada. Each province has its own funding model, tuition cap, and support systems. So a student in Alberta may face a very different reality than one in Nova Scotia or British Columbia. So we ended up with a patchwork system and no clear national vision for post-secondary access. So what happens when we make higher education expensive or debt-inducing? We get students delaying or avoiding university, families going into debt to fund education, grads delaying milestones, home buying, or family planning, or even retirement savings. And talented students from low income backgrounds missing out altogether. And here's the irony: the more expensive education becomes, the more unequal society becomes. Meanwhile, in many European Union countries where education is free or low cost, there is better social mobility. A student from a poor family can get a medical degree in Germany or France without a lifetime of debt. That's not just fair, it's a smart policy. So let's be honest, the European model is not perfect either. In some countries, free education leads to overcrowded lecture halls and waitlists, and some argue it results in lower per student spending or that it's harder to innovate quickly. Others point out that if university is free, taxpayers are still subsidizing students who may come from wealthier families. But overall, the outcomes still tend to favor access, equity, and long term national investment. Countries like Germany, Netherlands, and Finland have prove that you can fund higher education well and still deliver quality. I think it all comes down to values and choices. But here's big real question. Do we see education as a right or as a privilege? Or do we build systems that lift people up or ones that sort people out by who can afford the entry fee? Europe made its choice to invest in its people early. The US made a different choice to privatize and monetize education. In Canada, we're still straddling the fence, unsure of which way to lean. Maybe it's time to decide. Because if we keep asking students to carry the burden of learning, we shouldn't be surprised when the white breaks them.